Welcome to Hidden Earth's Sleep Story. Tonight we will read from the book, Storm and Bloom, the Elemental Saga. Prologue, The Cracking Sky. The sky was not meant to break. But over the once placid stretch of Windroot Hollow, where the forest canopy swayed in peaceful rhythm and the winds danced like whispers between branches, something ancient stirred. Not a beast. Not a god. But a wound. And it was widening. It began as a tremor, felt first by the roots. The druids of the Eleran wilds, their palms pressed to the moss, whispered that the ground had become uneasy. Trees once lush with bloom refused to flower. Birds flew in spirals they could not explain. The winds, once partners in pollination and harmony, grew erratic, lashing through the forest without warning, tearing blossoms from their stems and scattering pollen like ash. To the north, atop the icy spires of the sky-rend peaks, stormcallers and air shamans stood upon their high altars and watched the clouds form unnatural patterns. The stars flickered. The ley currents wavered. The wind no longer obeyed. Thalen Skydrift, newly named High Shaman of Skyrend, stood alone beneath the great sky wheel and listened to the soundless groan of the world. To his people, this was a time of reclamation. The air was theirs by birthright, and the forest's quiet expansion southward had long been a thorn buried too deep. But to Thalen, the wind carried something older than conquest, a warning. Far below, beneath the soil and roots, within the lightless veins of the hollow deep, something breathed. It had been silent for centuries, dormant through the age of flame and the tide-bound wars. Not because it was dead, but because the world above had remained balanced. Now, that balance was crumbling. In the Eleran groves, Sylve Lightvale, druid chosen of the Bloomguard, wandered the glades with sleepless eyes. The songs of the trees had changed. Flowers bloomed out of season. Bark cracked from trunks like peeling skin. Her grove's heartroot, once a steady rhythm in her bones, now beat like a war drum. "It is the wind," whispered the elders. "It is the drought," muttered the young. "It is the storm," Sylve whispered to herself. "But it is also the hollow." And when the skies above cracked, not in noise, but in feeling, when birds fell from flight, and thunder rolled without lightning, and roots shrank away from the deep, both Thalen and Sylve looked to the horizon. And made the same, separate choice: we must act. But the skies no longer waited. Nor did the forest. Chapter 1, Return to Balance. The moon hung low over the Nexus conclave, casting a silvery sheen across its glass-like surface, a natural platform at the very center of Hidden Earth, where all elemental currents met. Suspended above a gentle whirl of mist and flickering fireflies, it shimmered with faint magical resonance, a place neither claimed nor dominated by any realm. Kael'tor stood at the northern edge of the circle, draped in woven sea silk robes that whispered of the tides. The trident staff of the tide-callers, the Vorlanis, glowed softly in his hand, its tip still damp with morning condensation. His long hair, streaked with salt grey from his time beneath the ocean's depths, was tied back in solemn respect. Opposite him stood Lyrian of the Ember Isles, garbed in flame-kissed crimson and gold, the Sereneth nestled in a shoulder-mounted claw of obsidian and bone. In Storm and Bloom, the Sereneth evolved from being a person, the fallen orchid queen in Ember and Tide, into a powerful relic, a flame-bound artifact of legacy and prophecy. Lyrian's eyes, once wild and defiant, now carried the weight of command and visions, tempered fire in mortal form. Between them, a flickering brazier of balanced flame and water burned silently, symbolic of their hard-won truce. 3 years, Kael'thor said, his voice like flowing current. 3 years of still waters and calm flame. And yet, peace feels borrowed. Lyrian looked out toward the horizon, where storm clouds churned in the direction of the sky-rend peaks. It always was, she replied. The tide turns, the flame flickers. We were only ever the beginning, Kael. As the first of the envoys arrived, their words fell quiet. From the north came sky chariots borne by wind elemental constructs, trailing streaks of lightning. From the south, bloom walkers emerged through woven arbors that unfolded midair, petals spiraling open like time-lapse blossoms. Thalen's skydrift descended first, robes snapping in the rising breeze. He gave Lyrian a measured nod, his eyes briefly resting on Kael'thor. A respectful, cautious distance. Moments later, Sylve Lightveil arrived in a shimmer of green-gold light, riding a living vine serpent that gently coiled itself into the platform before dispersing into pollen. She bowed her head to Lyrian, gave Thalen a cool glance, and approached Kael'thor with warmth. You feel it too, don't you? She whispered. The imbalance. Kael'thor gave a slow nod. The storm gathers. And the roots brace. A chorus of wind blew across the platform, rustling hair and robes. The elemental leaders gathered fire, water, air, and bloom. The earthbound and spirit walkers had sent no representatives. Lyrian stepped forward, raising the Sereneth. This council is not for ceremony. It is for warning. Something has changed. The Sereneth stirred, and not with fire alone. Sylve knelt by the central circle, placing a seed at its heart. It pulsed briefly, then split, revealing a red-tinged sprout. The forest responds. It grows wild at its edges, as if reaching, or resisting. Thalen frowned. In Skyrend, the winds twist against our call. Altars hum without provocation. Lightning strikes unbidden. The ley lines have shifted. Kael'thor turned to them all. This is not merely elemental imbalance. This is invitation. Something stirs beneath or above all of us. And it tests our unity. A long silence followed. Then, from behind the circle, a whisper carried on the wind. Unity never lasts. No one spoke of who said it, or whether it was said at all. Above them, the moon began to dim, veiled by clouds born of no known weather. The conclave did not adjourn with words. The leaders simply drifted apart, some thoughtful, some doubtful, all quietly afraid. The balance, once restored, now stood on trembling ground. Chapter 2: Skydrift of the Peaks. The Skyrend peaks rose like ancient fangs from the land, their jagged heights cutting through the sky like blades. Winds howled through the narrow passes, thick with mist and charged with latent energy. Storm altars pulsed atop each summit, obsidian slabs carved with skyglyphs, now flickering erratically, their usual rhythm broken. Thalen Skydrift stood barefoot on the Area of Voices, the highest platform in the Skyrend peaks, carved into the cliffside by generations of windbinders. Lightning crackled in distant clouds. His long cloak, stitched with feathers of stormraven and skyfin, whipped around him like a banner of unrest. Below, hundreds of skyborn gathered warriors, shamanic elders, and windbinders alike. They watched their rising star with a mixture of awe and concern. Thalen, though young, had become a symbol of revitalized power, sharp-willed, articulate, and unyielding in vision. The wild growth of the south creeps ever closer, Thalen announced, voice echoing across the cliffs. The forests reach higher into our skies, smothering ley lines that were once ours by right and right. An elder stepped forward, Erak Venner, ancient and brittle, with a face lined like cracked granite. His voice rasped, yet it held gravity. You speak of encroachment, Thalen. But have we forgotten the wars of wind and vine? How many died the last time we struck first? Thalen held his gaze, eyes steeled. I do not call for war, Erak. I call for sovereignty. Our altars spark without summoning. The ley winds twist against us. Something is pulling at the storm. He turned to the crowd. Skyrend was born free in the air. We bow to no forest root, no blossom that winds upward to choke the sky. We must act, before the sky closes above us. A murmur rose among the crowd. Some cheered. Others whispered. At his side, his advisor and bond-sister Kirain Windcloak leaned in. Her hair flowed like unraveling wind current, and her tone was measured. They listen. But your words edge toward prophecy, and prophecy is dangerous here. Thalen's expression darkened. Better danger than silence. He led Kirain through the northern corridor of wind-cut stairs, deeper into the skyward archives, a vault of weathered crystal shelves and binding glyphs, holding centuries of storm lore. As they descended into the inner sanctum, a wind elemental flickered into view, a childlike wisp with a spiraling core of stormlight. It floated before them, humming in distress. This one, Kirain whispered. She's not bound. She came unbidden. The spirit's voice crackled like distant thunder. The skies remember what roots would bury. Suddenly, the glyphs on the surrounding walls shuddered. Several sparked red, not blue, not white, a deep crimson, the color of corrupted fire. Of fell winds. Of broken harmony. Thalen stepped back. What is this? A low hum resonated through the chamber, and a word formed in the wind, convergence. Kirain touched her pendant, a relic of high air binding. This is more than ley line interference. Thalen clenched his fist. We must go to the Windroot Hollow. If there is to be a reckoning, we will not meet it from behind a wall of clouds. He turned sharply, already planning routes, rituals, alliances. Behind him, the red light pulsed once more, quiet, but insistent. Outside, the skies churned. The peaks stood tall, but the wind no longer obeyed. Chapter 3, Lightvale of the Wilds. The Eleran Wilds pulsed with life, a forest so ancient and vast it seemed to breathe with its own will. Towering trees, their bark etched with glowing green runes, formed living bridges between canopies. Blossoms the size of shields opened and closed with the sun's rhythm. Flocks of petal wings drifted lazily between vines heavy with fruit and memory. Beneath the canopy, ancient roots hummed with primal awareness. In the center of it all stood the Heartgrove, a living cathedral of bark and bloom. Its walls grew from woven tree trunks, intertwined with crystalline sap and flowered vines that pulsed to a heartbeat deeper than time. The Heartgrove was not built, it was grown by 10 generations of druids, and it was said that its core housed a fragment of the first seed that birthed the forest. Sylve Lightvale stood beneath the boughs of the ancestral tree, one hand resting on its bark. The tree was whispering again. The skies scream, it said. And the wind claws at the branches. Her expression was calm, but her mind raced. Druidic tattoos swirled along her arms in faint green-gold luminescence, shifting subtly with her breath. Her long white gold hair flowed behind her like a silken veil, braided with petals from the everbloom orchid, the sacred flower of her lineage. "Storms move with purpose now," she said aloud to the tree. "Not just weather, intent." From the shadows of the grove stepped her closest guardian and confidant, Thirin Evermoon, a silent warrior druid clad in living armor of bark and lichen. He spoke in a low voice, respectful but grave. "The border near Windroot Hollow trembles. The winds buffet the treetops, and strange birds have fled from the northern canopy. The sky spirits no longer visit the bloom altars." Sylve nodded. "They feel they are no longer welcome. Or they were warned." She knelt by a small pool of mirrored sap and dipped her fingers into it. As the liquid shimmered, it revealed visions, ley line maps glowing faintly, wild magic currents looping unnaturally, and something pulsing in the heart of the Skyrend peaks. "Thalen," she whispered. "His stirred the altars." Thirin scowled. "The Skyborn prepare for dominance. They seek to claim the currents above us." "Then let them try," she said, rising. "We will not pluck their feathers. But we will entwine their roots. We are not conquerors, but we are not prey." Outside, druids of the Bloomguard gathered. They stood in silent reverence, awaiting instruction. Some bore staffs crowned in flowering antlers, others wielded curved sickles and blooming whips of living ivy. They did not march. They grew, appearing from the land itself as if called. Sylve raised both hands. "Eleran will not be overtaken. We do not begin wars, but we end them by outlasting. The forest will remain, as it always has, stronger with time, deeper with wisdom." Murmurs of agreement rippled like wind through leaves. Yet as the druids dispersed into the trees, Thirin remained beside her. "You hesitate," he said softly. "Not in voice, but in spirit." She looked up to where the sun dappled through thick branches. "Because I have seen what happens when vines strangle wind, and when wind tears down roots. There is no peace in dominance. Only ruin." As she turned, the ancestral tree whispered again a single word that made her blood chill: "Verdant Fang." She stopped. That word had not been spoken aloud in decades. She turned back to the tree slowly. "They live still." The bark groaned. "They grow." Far away, nestled in a shadowed grove beyond the druid's sight, a flower opened, one of deep black petals ringed in crimson. Chapter 4: The Growing Rift. Windroot Hollow had long been neutral ground, a fertile valley where sky met soil, where flowering canopies brushed the mountain winds. Once a sacred meeting place of druids and stormshamans alike, it now stood under tension, its serenity cracked by watchful eyes and veiled threats. A veil of morning mist hung low as Kael'tor descended into the hollow, accompanied by a pair of Tidecaller guardians. The air shimmered faintly from atmospheric strain, a sign that leyline tension was rising again. To the west, white-feathered banners of the Skyborn Watch fluttered beside high stone spires. To the east, vines coiled around smooth bark pillars etched with glyphs of the Bloomguard. At the center, a stone circle etched with wind and root symbols awaited its envoys. Once used for unity rituals, it now bore cracks from old clashes, overgrown with creeping moss and restless lichen. Kael'tor stepped into the circle alone. A sharp wind gusted overhead, not natural. Thalen's skydrift landed with practiced grace, boots skimming the earth like a bird touching water. He gave Kael'tor a respectful nod, though his gaze was distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. Moments later, The air itself parted as a flowering path unfolded. From it stepped Sylve Lightvale, calm as ever, her green and gold robes trailing silent vines in her wake. Her expression remained measured, but her jaw was tight. Kael'thor raised both hands. "We come to preserve peace. Let this meeting not become the stone that shatters the river." Thalen answered first. "Then let us speak of the vines that creep ever higher, of the roots that strangle our sacred air altars, buried beneath forest overgrowth. Our ley channels are twisting. The wilds claim what does not belong to them." Sylve's reply was swift. "And yet the skyships hover closer to our borders. Bloom altars have been found burned, their guardians missing. Shall I show you the petals scorched by your skyfire?" Kael'thor stepped between them. "No proof has yet been offered. The border guards speak of sabotage, not battle. I suspect other hands." Thalen narrowed his eyes. "Perhaps your hands are too close to the soil to see clearly, Kael'thor. And yours are too far above to see the damage you cause," Sylve retorted. A sudden burst of wind howled through the hollow, unnatural, sharp-edged, laced with static. From the ridges, two flares of colored light erupted, one blue, one green, followed by an explosion that rocked the valley floor. All three leaders turned instantly. Sylve raised her hand, vines lashing from her fingers to shield the stone circle. Thalen conjured a whirlwind dome. Kael'thor summoned a wall of sea mist. Smoke curled from a nearby bloom altar. Scorched earth. Shattered stone. A torn banner with the skyborn crest. Guards from both factions rushed in. Weapons were drawn, living spears of thorn, and storm-charged blades. Accusations rang out. Bloomguard sabotage. Skyborn deception. An act of war. Kael'thor shouted, "Enough!" But the damage was done. The peace that had hung by a thread now frayed before their eyes. Sylve's voice cut through the clamor. "We will withdraw from Windroot Hollow until we know the truth. But make no mistake, Eleran will not retreat a second time." Thalen folded his arms, stormlight curling at his fingertips. "And Skyrend will not yield the skies to root and vine." Kael'thor remained in the circle as both leaders turned from one another and vanished into mist and wind. Left alone, he looked up at the dimming sun. "Not again," he whispered. But far above, hidden in the cliff shadows, two unseen figures watched, cloaked in vine-dark robes, their eyes glowing with emerald fire. One whispered, "The first seed has sprouted." Chapter 5, Seeds and Sparks. The skies above Windroot Hollow were no longer calm. Ash drifted where once pollen danced. The once shared valley now bristled with tension, fortified roots curled protectively over Bloomguard camps, while high above, skyborn sentinels soared in widening circles, their eyes scanning for any sign of further provocation. At the hollow's outer ridge, a pair of scouts, one druid, one sky shaman, met in uneasy silence. Between them, the blackened remains of a totem lay charred and shattered, half buried beneath soot and creeping ivy. The carving bore symbols from both factions, root and wind. Neutral ground, desecrated. Sabotage, muttered the Skyborn, kneeling to inspect the burn patterns. But not by ours. The Bloomguard scout sniffed the air, nose wrinkling. This wasn't druidic flame either. Something unnatural. Something wild. They locked eyes, but spoke no more. Suspicion had replaced trust, and silence grew louder than truth. Back at the Skyrend war roost, high in the peaks, Thalen Skydrift stood beneath a storm altar flaring with intermittent pulses. The crystal core at its center, once stable sky blue, now pulsed with hues of red and violet. Nearby, a hawk rider descended, her cloak torn and face streaked with soot. "They struck again," she said. 2 more sky perches reduced to rubble. Bloomguard banners left behind. Thalen said nothing for a long moment. He stared into the heart of the altar as if trying to read its erratic glow. "Do you believe it?" "No," she said softly. "Not this way. But the peaks are restless. If we do not act, the clans will demand someone does." Thalen exhaled, fingers tightening at his sides. "Then let us find truth, or if not truth, strength enough to weather the lie." In the heart of the Eleran wilds, Sylve Lightvale walked the edge of a crater newly formed beside a sacred grove. The earth was scorched in spirals, a pattern not found in any druidic flame. Thorned vines had tried to regrow the clearing overnight but withered at the center. "This is not natural," Thirin said, kneeling beside her. "Even flame has order. This devours." Sylve reached toward the soil and whispered a short chant. The ground responded with flickers of memory, echoes of the flame that danced here. She flinched. "Void touched," she murmured. Thirin's eyes widened. "The verdant fang?" Sylve didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the Bloomguard captains gathering nearby. "No retaliation," she ordered. "Not yet. We defend the forest, not fuel the fire. The Skyborn may provoke, but it is not they who poisoned this glade." One of the younger druids bristled. "They will not show us the same restraint. Why not strike first and end this?" "Because fire breeds fire," Sylve said, standing tall. "And roots caught in flame do not burn alone. They pull the forest down with them." That night, across hidden earth, rumors flared like sparks in dry grass. Skyborn elders debated activating the Stormforged Accord, a wartime alliance dormant since the Blightwinds. Bloomguard circles quietly reinforced old Bloomwards, calling beasts to guard border glades once considered sacred to all. Meanwhile, Kael Tor stood atop the cliffs of Zorethkai, staring across the waves toward the hollow. The sea was calm, unnaturally so. Lyrian joined him, flames from her shoulder pauldron crackling in protest of the still air. "Too quiet," she muttered. Kael Tor nodded. "A spark has caught. But no one yet sees the flame." She turned to him. "Then we'll douse it. Before it becomes a blaze that consumes the world." Behind them, far from the cliff's edge, a flicker of red light pulsed once, then faded into the wind. Chapter 6: The Whispering Stone. The path to the Sereneth was not taken lightly nor quickly. Carved deep into the volcanic caverns beneath the Ember Isles, the Chamber of Flameborn Echoes was a place few dared approach. Even Lyrian, now the flamebound warden and bearer of the Sereneth, felt the weight of the descent. The walls of the winding tunnel shimmered with molten crystal veins, pulsing like a living artery. Every few steps, a memory surged from the stone echoes of past bearers, of battles fought in flame and sacrifice. She carried no torch. The Sereneth lit her way, its ruby-red glow burning like a star on her shoulder. At the base of the spiral, the tunnel widened into a massive chamber. The Sereneth's pedestal, a jagged pillar of obsidian shaped like a clawed hand, rose from a pool of quiet magma. The artifact pulsed louder now, thrumming in rhythm with Lyrian's heart. She stepped forward. And the world shifted. The flames around the room grew tall and still, frozen like statues. A searing heat filled her vision, but it did not burn. In the stillness, a voice echoed within her mind, older than memory, older than language. You come again, Flameborn. And the balance trembles once more. Lyrian knelt. The skies rage. The roots stir. The peace we forged begins to fray. Tell me what stirs in the hollow deep. The Sereneth answered not with words, but vision. Lyrian was no longer in the chamber. She stood in an ethereal mirror of hidden earth, only it was whole. The skies danced with streaks of golden wind, the forests bloomed without end, and each elemental realm was braided into the other, seamless and unified. But then, a crack formed. A split between bloom and storm, wind and root. She watched a once lush valley become scarred by battle, not of armies, but of philosophies. Lightning rained from the sky. Vines strangled towers. Altars fell. Trees burned. And from the ruins, a chasm opened. From its depths rose something ancient, vast, and unseen, a force neither elemental nor mortal. Unity shattered birth's hunger unbound, the voice warned. She saw a single tree, the heartroot, its roots descending into hollow deep. Beneath it, darkness pulsed, bound only by 6 glowing chains, each bearing the sigil of a realm: fire, water, air, earth, bloom, and void. But 2 of those chains were breaking. Air and bloom. Should sky and bloom fall into war, the hollow deep awakens. And it remembers its hunger. Lyrian's breath caught. Then I must stop them. Again. The flames swirled. You cannot stop what must choose itself. But you may offer the fire or the light. When she awoke, she was on her knees, sweat slicking her brow. The Sereneth dimmed, its message spoken. She touched the magma pool's surface, it hissed, then calmed. From the shadows of the chamber, Kael'tor stepped forward. He had waited, wordless, in the high tunnel. You saw something, he said quietly. She stood, her voice hoarse. A warning. Another war? No, she said, brushing strands of hair from her face. A choice. Between war and something far worse. They exited the chamber together, the Sereneth dim but warm against her skin. As they emerged into the Ember Isle's fading dusk, the wind carried a scent not of smoke, but of ash, the kind left after something ancient begins to stir. Chapter 7: Assemblies of Fire and Mist. The Ember Isles simmered with heat, not from open flame, but from unease. In the Hall of Embers, a grand chamber shaped from fused obsidian and sunstone, flamelight danced across the carved visages of every fire matron in Orchid history. The ceiling swirled with ever-burning fire sigils that changed shape depending on who stood beneath them, a legacy of living flame tied to the will of the sorceresses. Lyrian stood at the center, the Sereneth pulsing against her shoulder. Around her, 12 Orchid elders sat in flame-wrought thrones, each bearing the ceremonial flame of their lineage. Their expressions were stern, their postures rigid with apprehension. The balance fractures again, Lyrian began, voice steady, eyes sweeping across them. And with it, the hollow deep stirs. Murmurs rippled through the circle, no name was ever spoken lightly of the hollow deep. Elder Shayla Vyr leaned forward. Her braids were adorned with charred stone beads that clacked with each movement. You say the winds and roots war again. Then let them. We are not trees to be felled, nor clouds to be scattered. Why involve the flame? Lyrian turned to her. Because fire spreads when the wind rises. And when the forests burn, the ash feeds the storm. We are not beyond this. Another elder, a Flame Peak, a harsh-tongued traditionalist, scoffed. The Skyborn crave control. The Bloomguard hide behind vines and riddles. Let them clash and cull each other. Fire need only wait. Lyrian's gaze sharpened. That arrogance nearly ended us during the Tideland War. Do you forget what water taught us? Fire alone cannot survive. It must choose what it burns, or it becomes its own destruction. The Sereneth flared, heat radiating across the hall. The flame sigils above responded, forming a 6-point glyph, the ancient mark of the elemental accord. Even the elders fell into silence. We do not join their war, Lyrian said, quieter now. We prevent it. Far away, in the Tidelands, Kael'tor returned to the submerged halls of Velmara's gaze, the Tidecaller capital sunken beneath crystal reefs and bioluminescent domes. Great manta rays drifted above as he passed through the coral arches. Within the Council of Mists, an amphitheater surrounded by cascading waterfalls, the elder shamans of the water realm assembled. They moved like the tides, slow, deliberate, and unpredictable. Their forms shimmered with translucent aqua runes, and their voices carried the weight of ocean trenches. The hollow deep speaks again, asked Elder Renuth, her body cloaked in drifting kelp silk. It was sealed before the first tide rose. By what right does it stir? Kael'tor stood in the center of the mist ring, letting water flow over his open hands. By the right of imbalance, he answered. Sky and bloom unravel. Peace cannot hold if they pull apart. A younger shaman, Sarino of the Reeflight, spoke up. The last accord cost us dearly. Half our guardians never returned from Zarethkai. What would you ask of us now? Kael'tor looked to the central pool, where the sea's memory was stored. A single drop of dark water emerged and floated before them, the Hollowdeep's essence. The elders gasped, not at the drop itself, but at its hue, a shade not seen since the void nearly consumed the coast. I ask not for war, Kael'tor said, his voice like steady waves, but for vigilance. For unity. If sky and bloom fall into chaos, we must be the anchor. He paused, then added, Lyrian summons the ember flame. I summon the tide. We seek to rekindle the accord. The waters calmed. A bell made of coral rang softly, not as agreement, but as acceptance of possibility. By nightfall, messengers of fire and mist were sent to the realms of earth, void, and bloom. Some would respond. Some would not. But the signal had been cast. A second accord may soon rise, not of alliance, but of necessity. And in the unseen places, something ancient heard the gathering and began to stir its limbs beneath the hollow deep. Chapter 8: Shadows Beneath the Bloom. The deeper groves of the Eleran wilds were a world apart from the sunlit canopies and melodic birdsong known to travelers. Beneath the golden leaves and radiant blooms, where sunlight barely reached, lay the verdant hollow, a dense, moss-draped maze of shadow-rooted trees, fungus-lit caves, and sacred ruins long reclaimed by nature. Few ventured here, and fewer returned unchanged. Sylve Lightvale walked alone through this labyrinth of hush and green. Her steps were silent, her presence almost indistinguishable from the forest itself. Yet even here, where life thrived in silence, something felt off. The vines were too still. The sap ran dark, the roots trembled. She paused by a fallen stone covered in bark-like growth. It bore the faded emblem of the old druidic circle, one that predated even the Bloomguard. Sylve placed her hand on it, whispering a chant of memory. The stone pulsed once and then cracked. From within, a withered bloom unfurled. Not a blossom of Eleran, but something twisted, a black-petaled flower veined in deep red, its center pulsing like a heartbeat. She recoiled. It responded by blooming further, releasing a sickly-sweet aroma tinged with decay. "Verdant fang," she whispered aloud. "So it's true." Later that evening, in the Heartgrove, she summoned her inner circle senior druids, Grovebinders, and her protector Thirin Evermoon. The chamber was tense. The air buzzed with pollen and pressure. "There have been whispers in the root lines," Sylve began. "Chants not taught in this age. Bloom rites altered, corrupted, made to consume, not restore. The ancient circle lives, in secret." The gathered druids shifted uneasily. One, a rigid old thorncaster named Velian Sporebark, stepped forward. The Verdant Fang were exiled generations ago. Banished for breaking the cycle. For twisting the wild into a weapon. "They survived," Sylve said firmly. "And they've returned. I found their mark in the verdant hollow. They've infected the root paths beneath our most sacred groves." Thirin frowned. "Then they seek more than sabotage. They want control. Of all Bloomguard." Sylve nodded slowly. "No. They want dominion. Not just of our forests, but of hidden earth itself." The room erupted in voices: outrage, disbelief, fear. "The Fang is a myth they would never return without inside help. What if they already have?" Sylve raised a hand. The murmurs ceased. "We do not descend into fear," she said. "We act with clarity. I will lead a root-binding descent into the hollow tomorrow. We must sever their growth before it rises to strangle everything we protect." Velian stepped back, but his expression was unreadable. That night, Sylve wandered the Heartgrove alone. She knelt before the moonwell of Seleneth, a reflective pool said to reveal hidden truths. As she peered into its waters, her reflection twisted. She saw herself, cloaked in vines, but her eyes were wrong, too green, too wild. She stood among burned sky altars and sunken flame pillars. Behind her, Bloomguard warriors marched under a banner woven not of roots, but of thorns. And atop her brow, a circlet of black petal roses. She blinked and the vision vanished. But the pool still rippled. And the petals of a verdant fang blossom floated upon its surface. In the hidden groves beyond the hollow, within a chamber of roots pulsing like muscle, a cloaked figure knelt before a mound of writhing plant matter. A voice echoed within the chamber, low and honey-thick. "She suspects." The figure nodded. "Good," the voice said. "Let her. The forest belongs not to balance, but to domination. We will not grow beside the storm. We will consume it." The blossom at the mound's heart bloomed wider, and its thorns began to curl inward like a maw. Chapter 9: Storm-Forged Alliances. The Skyrend peaks were not solitary in their reach. Northward and eastward sprawled a fractured realm of frost-bitten ridges and high mountain passes known as the Crown of Wms, home to the iceborn shamans and the ancient stone legions of Stonehold. These were not lands of diplomacy but of oath and ordeal. Thalen Skydrift, flanked by his second-in-command Kirain Windcloak, approached the Skyforge Pass, where the storm met stone and air chilled into frost. Towering statues of long-fallen warlords lined the trail, their eyes covered in snow, their weapons broken in half as a pact-bound warning. Here, peace comes only from power. The Iceborn won't bend easily, Kirain warned, her voice muffled by the biting wind. Their loyalty must be earned or demanded. They won't need to bend, Thalen replied. Just rise. Like us. They entered Frost Hollow, a village carved into the ice-crusted cliffs where wind whistled through frozen chimneys. There, the Stormkin Council awaited them in a hall of icicles and rune-marked stone, where blue fire crackled in braziers and ancestral whispers clung to the walls. At the head sat Grimgal of the Hollowhail, a frost shaman with a face like chiseled granite and eyes clouded with stormlight. His braided beard was tipped with glacier shards, and his cloak bore the sigil of the eternal gale, the binding force of the north. You come seeking alliances, Grimgal said without ceremony. Not answers. Thalen bowed, measured and respectful. Both. The roots tighten around our skies. The Bloomguard grows bold. We feel it in the ley winds. Your altars must feel it too. They do, Grimgal admitted. But wind does not bow to root. And neither do we. Kirain stepped forward. If the hollow deep rises, your storms won't shield you. We need your forces, your rights. Stand with us not as vassals, but as brothers of the sky. A long pause. Then Grimgal stood, his breath forming frost before him. We will join the storm. But only if the pact is renewed. Pact? Thalen asked. The elder shaman turned and pointed to a wall carving 6 glyphs surrounding a 7th, shattered one. The Skybreaker Oath. Forged when last the hollow deep stirred. 1 Skyborn, 1 Iceborn, 1 Stonebound. A triangle of might. You bring the wind. We bring the frost. But the third? The Stonehold. Thalen narrowed his eyes. Then we go to them next. Beyond the glacial cliffs, the land cracked and dropped into the Ironroot Barrens, a land of craggy stone and subterranean canyons where red-skinned orc tribes and the earthen stonebound carved citadels directly into mountainsides. It was said their hearts beat like drums and their blood echoed the sound of shifting tectonics. In the fortress city of Durkalan, Thalen and his entourage were met by towering guardians sculpted from volcanic stone. The stonebound warden, Room Earthspeaker, approached a being of living obsidian and fossilized bark, whose voice rumbled like distant thunder. You seek war, Room said. Or its illusion. Thalen, weary now from his journey, stood firm. I seek protection. Unity against a greater threat. Room's eyes glowed faintly. The forest rises, yes. But we remember the last war between Sky and Bloom. The roots shattered mountains. Your winds buried cities in avalanches. Kirain drew a breath. And what would happen if that conflict awakened something deeper? At that, Room's expression shifted. Subtle, but present. The hollow deep, he murmured. It stirs again. Thalen extended a storm-forged token, a sliver of sky crystal bearing the same glyphs seen in Grimgal's hall. Reform the triangle. Bind air, frost, and stone. Let the storm be forged again. A moment passed. Then Room closed his stone fist around the crystal and nodded. The storm-forged pact shall be renewed. That night, at the edge of Stormhall, Thalen stood beside Kirain as the 3 emissaries, himself, Grimgal, and Room raised their hands to the sky. Lightning arced between them, then plunged into a carved altar of skyglass, ice, and stone. The winds howled. Snow began to fall. And deep beneath the mountains, a pulse echoed through the ley lines, felt even in the roots of Eleran, and in the lowest pit of the hollow deep. Chapter 10. Beneath a Hollow Sky. The entrance to Hollow Deep was not marked on any map. It could not be found, it found you. And it had found Kael'tor. He stood now at the rim of a massive sinkhole in the southeastern corner of the Ironroot Barrens, a place where the land caved in upon itself in a silent spiral of stone and shadow. Mists clung to the edge like ghostly fingers. There were no sounds here, not of birds, beasts, or even wind. Only the steady pulse beneath his feet. A thrum like a heartbeat trapped within the world. The spirit walkers were waiting. 5 of them, cloaked in flowing garments woven from starlight and dusk, emerged from the gloom. Their faces were obscured, some wore bone masks, others hid behind shifting veils of smoke. One stepped forward, her presence both graceful and unsettling. Her voice did not echo, it simply existed inside Kael'tor's mind. The tide returns, as it always does. Kael'tor bowed, showing respect not out of fear, but recognition. I come seeking what was buried. Beneath flame, frost, root, and wind. I come to remember what we all chose to forget. The spirit walker tilted her head. Few remember willingly. They led him downward. Through the weeping hollows, where forgotten dreams dripped from cavern ceilings like dew. Through silent stone gates, which recorded no echoes, no footfalls. Past the chambers of unmaking, where even light refused to linger. And finally, to a colossal cavern pulsing with ley energy, the Heartfall Vault. At its center stood a monument older than any realm above. A massive, 6-sided obelisk, each face etched with a symbol of an elemental force: fire, water, air, earth, bloom, and void. It was bound in bands of shimmering spectral iron. Cracks webbed across 2 of its faces, air and bloom. Kael'tor approached slowly. Visions surged into him the moment his fingers touched the stone. He saw a time before the elemental realms, a primeval age where all forces flowed freely, chaotic and beautiful. Then came the binding, the shaping of realms, the division of elements. The Hollow Deep was not a prison, it was a sacrifice. A convergence of excess, of imbalance made flesh. It had been sealed by 6 avatars, each bearing the full weight of their element, to trap the entity that fed upon conflict. But the seal was failing. He saw wars, vines smothering the skies, storms ripping forests into dust, and through it all, a presence rising from the depths. Not a creature. Not a god. A hunger. Its name was not spoken. Its will was not clear. But its nature was known. It thrived where elements clashed, where unity cracked. It fed not on magic, but on division. Kael'tor staggered back, gasping, the vision gone. The spirit walker stood behind him. You understand now. He nodded, sweat cold against his skin. If bloom and storm go to war, he said, this hunger will rise. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. It will be real. The spirit walker placed a withered hand over the bloom and air sigils. And when it does, there will be no realm left to divide. Later, as Kael'tor ascended alone through tunnels lit with faint void light, he whispered to the stone, Lyrian, we were too late once. We won't be again. He paused at the final gate, looking back. Somewhere far beneath, the Hollow Deep pulsed again. Not in warning. In anticipation. Chapter 11, The Druid's Gambit. The Eleran wilds had gone silent. Where once birds sang and leaves whispered with the rhythm of life, now the forest waited, tense, watchful, as though it sensed the choice that approached. A heavy mist curled through the trees, carrying the scent of damp moss and something older. Something rising from deep within the roots. Sylve Lightvale stood alone at the base of the elderbark tree, the oldest living organism in Eleran. Its trunk was broader than a fortress tower, and its crown spread like a woven canopy across the entire grove. Here, in the sacred root-heart glade, the ley lines of bloom converged. She had made her decision. "I will attempt the binding," she told Thirin Evermoon, who stood nearby with unease carved into his weathered features. "It's forbidden," he warned. "The Heartroot Pact was abandoned for a reason. You'd link your soul to the forest. If the hollow deep stirs, it already has," Sylve interrupted gently. "We cannot wait for the roots to rot beneath us. If there is still time to prevent war, I will buy it. With everything I am." Thirin clenched his fists, jaw tight. But he did not argue. He simply knelt, placing his hand over the roots. "Then we stand watch while you fall." The ritual began at moonrise. The forest responded instantly. Vines slithered from the earth to form a circle around Sylve. Blossoms unfurled. Insects stilled. The very breath of the wilds held. Sylve knelt, bare feet pressed to the mossy floor. Her staff lay before her, its living core flickering between green and gold. She closed her eyes and whispered the ancient words, a litany not spoken since the days when druids communed with the realm itself. As her chant rose, the roots beneath her cracked open gently, not as a wound, but as an invitation. Green tendrils laced around her limbs, her waist, her throat, her heart. Light flooded her vision. The world dissolved. She floated in the root stream. Here, time was fluid. She felt the memories of every grove, of every blooming and every dying. She saw generations of druids dance in the canopies, and ancient beasts pass into soil. She felt all of Eleran, its joy, its fear, its silent, growing rage. And then, the vision shifted. She saw the Windroot Hollow, but as it would be if the war came, burning vines, shredded petals, broken antlers, and skyships thundering lightning into the canopy. She saw Thalen, wounded, surrounded by frost and flame. She saw Bloomguard warriors striking first, spurred by panic, not strategy. And deeper still, beneath the hollow, she saw the hollow deep open. Not like a gate. Like a mouth. The forest screamed. Sylve's spirit shuddered as the forest tried to hold her. It wanted her to stay, to become its voice permanently, to anchor the growing wild. It offered her immortality, unity, control. But she refused. "No," she whispered. "I am not here to rule you. I am here to balance you." The root stream recoiled, then sighed. The tendrils retracted. And Sylve collapsed into the moss. Hours later, she awoke, weak, her skin pale and eyes distant. A faint green glow lingered at her heart. The mark of the pact. Thirin knelt beside her, relief in his breath. "You returned." "I saw it," she whispered. "I saw what's coming. And how little it takes to tip us over." He helped her stand. Around them, the trees shifted not in alarm, but in unity. The forest had accepted her once more. "I must go to Thalen," she said. "Now?" Thirin asked. "After that." She nodded. "If I don't, we will both be too late." As she prepared to ride, a single black-petaled bloom drifted down from the treetops and landed at her feet. The verdant Fang had seen her act, and they would not let it stand. Chapter 12, Sereneth's Flame. The Ember Isles had entered their long dusk, the skies streaked in shades of molten gold and blood-red, a reflection, perhaps, of the tension gathering across hidden earth. The fires of the forges burned low. The flame monastery's bells had not rung in days. Atop the volcanic spire of Valsarin, the highest point in the archipelago, Lyrian stood before the flame mirror, an ancient obsidian panel half melted into the mountainside. It did not reflect the world behind her, but the world within, a reflection of fire's truth. Behind her, the Sereneth pulsed like a second heart. She stared into the mirror and saw flickers of memory, her battles beside Kael'tor, the treaty forged in blood and salt, the moment she became flame-bound. And now, she saw something else. A storm over trees. A bloom choked by ash. A war waiting to be lit. "Show me what he sees," she whispered. The mirror rippled. A new image took shape, Thalen Skydrift, standing atop a sky altar, overlooking the windroot border. His eyes were shadowed by duty, his face drawn by the weight of inevitability. Around him, the storm-forged pact marched, skyborn windriders, iceborn frostbinders, and stonebound siege beasts. They were ready. And Sylve had not yet arrived. Lyrian turned away from the mirror and descended the spire, her steps rapid and sure. At the base of the peak, Kael'tor waited in the shadow of a lava fall, the waters steaming as they struck his sea-silk cloak. "She's made the pact," Lyrian said. "Sylve?" Kael'tor asked. Lyrian nodded. "Heartroot bound." She took the risk. "Then time is short," he said grimly. "Thalen marches. Windroot Hollow won't survive open war. Neither will Hidden Earth." They rode together across fire bridges and molten fields, flames parting before Lyrian like a curtain of silk. At the edge of the Ember Isles, she summoned a flamewing, a massive phoenix-like creature formed from pure living fire. With Kael'tor riding beside her atop a wave-crest serpent, they soared toward the gathering front. By nightfall, they reached the Storm March, where the skyships of Skyrend floated ominously over Windroot's northern ridges. Camps lined the cliffs, towers of frost, stone, and wind swirling together like a triumvirate of force. At their heart stood Thalen, conferring with Grimgal and Room. He looked up as Lyrian descended in a halo of flame. "Flame petal," he said, nodding once. "Skydrift," she answered. He glanced at Kael'tor, then back at her. "You've come to beg again." "No," Lyrian said, stepping closer, Sereneth pulsing at her side. "I've come to warn you. You stand at the edge of something ancient, something not even your alliance can weather. I've heard this before. Hollow deep, ancient hunger, doom and dread." He folded his arms. It always sounds convenient when peace fails to serve someone's purpose. This isn't about purpose. It's about consequence, Kael'tor said sharply. The seal is cracking. Your war feeds it. And if I do nothing, Thalen said, I let bloom entangle the skies, subvert ley channels, consume the air. We were told to wait before, and what did waiting buy us? Lyrian took one step forward, and the Sereneth flared, a beam of crimson light shot upward, piercing the clouds. Silence fell across the camp as warriors turned to watch. She spoke with fire on her tongue. The first time, we waited too long. The second time, we acted too soon. This time, you listen." She held out her hand, and a vision formed in the flames, the hollow deeps more opening, ley chains snapping, bloom and storm dying alike. Thalen paled. For a moment, the weight of command wavered behind his eyes. But then, behind him, came the slow beat of war drums. The Iceborne had begun to advance. The Bloomguard responded from the ridgeline with low-pitched horns of warning. Thalen's gaze hardened. "You're too late." But before he could give the order, a tremor shook the earth. A sound like a mountain breathing. And far below, beneath both armies, a hollow voice rose like a whisper carried on thunder. "Choose." Chapter 13, War at the Canopy. The first arrow of war was not fired by hand, but by fear. In the moments after the earth trembled and the hollow deep whispered, the armies of Storm and Bloom stood frozen, poised on the edge of cataclysm. But it took only a spark to ignite the dry tangle of suspicion and anger. A rogue Windrider's bolt, misfired or perhaps planted, struck the outer branch of a Bloomguard watchtree. The ancient tree groaned, cracked, and fell into the forward lines. Screams rose. The vines retaliated, wrapping around the wreckage and launching it skyward with a forceful whip that clipped a passing skyship. Then came the trumpets, not from commanders, but from chaos. The battle had begun. Windroot Hollow, once sacred ground of balance, became a living battlefield. Skyships loomed overhead, hurling arcs of lightning that burst across the canopies like rupturing stars. Bloomguard druids responded with binding chants, pulling living vines up from the forest floor to wrap the ships in flowering chains and drag them to the earth. Iceborne frostbinders unleashed blizzards along the ridgelines, freezing vines mid-lash. But the Bloomguard beast callers countered, summoning moss-tusked war beasts that barreled through ice and stone with equal fury. Stone-bound giants lumbered from cliffside barracks, slamming the earth with hammer fists that cracked open bloom altars and split ley pools. Yet as each altar fell, the forest responded not with rage, but with instinct. The roots surged like a tidal wave. And through it all, Thalen Skydrift and Sylve Lightvale hunted each other, not to kill but to reach. Thalen descended through a shattered watchtower, stormlight pouring from his palms, blades of air forming in both hands. His cloak was torn, his breath short. Around him, the peak's forces were beginning to buckle. The Bloomguard had learned the rhythm of their attacks. He found Sylve in the lower canopy, surrounded by a circle of thorns and glowing pollen. Her eyes were still pale with the heartroot's touch. She looked at him not as a soldier, but as a seer. "You still have time," she said, voice hoarse from spells and grief. "You always had time. Why didn't you listen?" Thalen raised his blades, then paused. The ground beneath them shifted again. The roots moaned. He looked down and saw it. A crack in the hollow. Not a physical tear, but a vein, a pulsing rift where the ley line's glow flickered. Like blood gone dark. From within came the sound of breathing. Sylve extended her hand. "You don't have to surrender. Just stop. Before we both lose everything." Thalen's blades dissolved into mist. But behind him, another force did not. A stone-bound warrior surged forward not by order, but by rage and hurled a boulder at the glade. Sylve turned just in time to cast a shielding vine, but the force of the impact knocked her back, into a pool of ley water. She gasped and screamed. The heartroot pact surged. The ley water glowed white-hot. And a pulse of uncontrolled bloom magic exploded outward. Thalen Dove, pulling her from the rupture, but it was too late. The blast ripped through both lines, not destroying, but unbinding. Vines, mist, frost, and stone all tossed into the air, scattering like petals in a hurricane. The battlefield fell silent. And from deep beneath the hollow, a voice, no longer whispering, no longer dormant, spoke. You have chosen. A thunderous crack split the earth. The ley line fissure widened. And something began to rise. Kael'tor and Lyrian, still battling to hold their flanks from spiraling into madness, turned toward the center of the valley. Lyrian gasped. No, a spine of black glass root began to emerge from the hollow. Kael'tor's voice broke. It's waking up. The war had lasted only hours. But the real battle against the hollow deep itself had now begun. Chapter 14, Shattered Leaves. Silence followed the eruption. A stillness deeper than death settled over Windroot Hollow. The sky, once filled with skyships and drifting pollen, was now heavy with ashen fog. Vines hung limp from shattered trees. Craters smoked across the glade. The forest no longer whispered, it waited, wounded. From the center of the battlefield, a black glass spire pierced the earth, obsidian and root intertwined, slick with ley fluid that shimmered sickly between red and violet. It pulsed like a beacon, or a warning. The hollow deep had surfaced, and it had begun to breathe. Sylve Lightveil lay curled at the edge of the ruptured ley pool, her body half submerged, skin pale with bloomlight. Her breaths were shallow. Petals drifted from her hair like shed feathers. But she was alive. Sylve, a voice rasped. Thaylen Skydrift limped into view, one arm slung uselessly at his side, his cloak reduced to scraps, but his eyes sharp with urgency. He knelt beside her, calling on what little wind remained at his fingertips to lift her out of the pool. I thought I could control the storm, he whispered. But the winds never listened. Not really. Sylve stirred faintly. The roots listened too much. They sat together, for a time, surrounded by ruins of their own making. Not enemies. Not lovers. Not heroes. Just survivors. Across the hollow, Kael'tor and Lyrian coordinated the retreat of both armies, not in victory or defeat, but in survival. Bloomguard and Stormforged alike dropped their weapons. Those still loyal to the fight now found themselves terrified of what they had awakened. Icebound are gone, Kael'tor reported grimly. Fled north. Stonebound cracked during the eruption. The air shamans are grounded. Vines no longer answer with precision. Lyrian studied the spire. That's not a structure. It's a tendril. He nodded. And I think it's only the first. At the forest edge, the ground had split in a jagged line, not down, but outward. Through the fracture, veins of red-tinted bloomroot twisted across the battlefield, reaching in all directions like feelers. Druids who had once sung to the trees now stood in open horror, unable to hear the forest's voice. Skyborn windcallers lifted their hands, but the air shuddered away from them, broken by the Hollowdeep's interference. For the first time in living memory, Hidden Earth's elements were not in balance. They were disconnected. As healers gathered the wounded and dismantled what remained of the war camps, Thaylen and Sylve stood together once more, beneath the hollow sky. He handed her a broken storm crystal, the sigil of his command. I'll return to Skyrend, he said. Dismantle the war councils. What's left of them? Sylve gave him a bloom seed, dull, blackened at the edges. I'll do the same in Eleran. The forest needs time. And truth. They looked at one another. No promises. No pledges. Only a shared resolve. Never again. Later that night, beneath a canopy of stars dimmed by ashfall, Kael'tor, Lyrian, Thalen, and Sylve stood in a broken circle where the pact once lay. We failed, Sylve said softly. No, Lyrian answered. We fought. Now we build. Kael'tor placed a hand over the earth, feeling the weakened flow of ley lines. The hollow deep is awake. But it's not yet risen. We still have time. Sylve and Thalen exchanged a glance. Then let's use it. A single root withdrew from the black glass spire. Not in retreat. In preparation. Chapter 15, A New Accord. Dawn broke hesitantly over Windroot Hollow, its light pale and fractured, bleeding through smoke and low-hanging cloud. The land was scarred, a jagged quilt of blackened roots, scorched canopy, and shattered sky altars. And yet, amidst the ruin, something new stirred. Small vines pushed through ash, curling gently around broken stones. A single bloom opened where the earth had cracked. The hollow was not healing, not yet, but it had stopped bleeding. At the very center of the valley, where the Sereneth, the Heartroot, and the Hollowdeep's wound had once aligned, now stood a new structure, part altar, part sanctuary, built from the remains of both factions' wargear, flowering wood interwoven with fragments of skyglass, moss, and wind steel. Here, Sylve Lightvale and Thalen Skydrift met again, surrounded by representatives of all realms who had survived the clash. Kael'tor and Lyrian stood behind them, no longer leading, only witnessing. The air was quiet. For once, the Hollowdeep did not whisper. Sylve stepped forward first. Her gait was still stiff, her aura dimmed since the Heartroot binding, but her voice rang clear. We stand upon soil burned by our own hands. Roots torn by pride. Skies darkened by fear. But this soil still grows. She placed her palm on the stone, a living heartroot engraved with both bloom and storm glyphs. I offer this sanctuary not as a border, but as a bridge. Thalen stepped beside her. His cloak, once a skyborn banner, had been trimmed and rewoven, now bearing a vine around the storm glyph. He nodded once, and placed his hand beside hers. Skyrend will no longer claim the skies alone. Nor will we seek to bind the wind in war. Let Windroot Hollow belong to all, a place where sky and bloom learn to breathe as one. He looked at Kael'tor. May the waters watch us. And to Lyrian, may the flame guide us. Kael'tor smiled faintly. Then let the tides carry this accord farther than the first. Lyrian stepped forward, the Sereneth now dulled to a soft ember. And let fire not burn what has already begun to bloom. The others came, hesitant at first, then with solemn resolve. Iceborne sent a single banner. The stone-bound carved a blessing into the altar's base. Even a representative of the spirit walkers, cloaked in dusk haze, appeared briefly, whispering only, "Balance stirs below." That evening, under the fractured stars, the second elemental accord was signed, not in ink, but in ritual. Each leader offered something of their realm. Sylve laid a sprig of Heartroot's bloom. Thalen broke his windblade and cast it into the ley fire. Kael'tor poured sacred tide water over the altar stone. Lyrian ignited the brazier with a spark of her own soul flame. The hollow watched. And for now, it slept. Later, as the campfires burned low, Thalen and Sylve sat together beside a stream slowly clearing of ash. "It'll take time," she said. "All things worth keeping do," Thalen replied. They sat in silence. Then she reached into her satchel and handed him a bloom seed, but this one glowed faintly, healthy again. "Plant it atop Skyrend. Let the wind carry its petals across the cliffs." Thalen nodded, then drew a small sky crystal from his belt, fractured but humming. "And let this anchor in your grove. So the wind always knows where home is." They exchanged the gifts in silence, sealing not just peace, but a beginning. Epilogue: Roots in the storm. The rain had not stopped in days. Not the kind that threatened ruin, but a quiet, persistent fall like the sky itself was exhaling. Across the glade of Equinox Hollow, water dripped from leaf to leaf, weaving silver trails down bark still scorched from battle. Ash had mixed with soil, blood with blossom, and still, new roots pushed through. At the center of the clearing, a tree now stood where once the ground had cracked. Its bark shimmered with veins of blue and green. Its roots coiled around a blackened stone, all that remained of the Hollowdeep's breach. Where death had spilled upward, now life slowly reclaimed. Sylve Lightvale rested beneath its shelter, her fingers stained with sap and soil. The Serenetha's ember pulsed softly beneath her collarbone, no longer wild, but warm, listening. She no longer carried the burden of bloom alone. Balance, she had come to learn, did not mean silence or stillness. It meant motion without destruction. A gust swept down from the northern peaks. She turned her eyes skyward. Descending through the thinning clouds, on a wind glider of woven stormglass, came Thalen Skydrift. His armor, once lined with jagged steel and pride, now bore feathers, leaves, and the emblem of a stormbloom etched in frost. He landed without words. None were needed. Kael'tor stood at the edge of the glade, his staff grounded in the mud, tide sigil flickering beneath the drizzle. Beside him, Lyrian Flamepetal stood with her hand over her heart, the Serenetha's glow reflected in her eyes. What once burned within her now tempered. They had seen war. They had seen the elements rebel. And now, they had seen them weave. Thalen approached Sylve and extended a simple gift, a seedling, wrapped in stormcloth. "Windroot," he said, "grown only on the highest spires. It bends with the gale, but breaks for no one." Sylve took it in silence, planting it beside the new tree. "Then we plant it here, where the hollow once whispered." A tremor ran through the earth, but it was not fear. It was growth. Behind them, emissaries from the Tidecallers, the Flame Guard, the Bloom Wardens, and the Skyborn stood together beneath a single canopy. Weapons sheathed. Banners braided. Their voices had once echoed in war chants. Now they spoke in song, a new one, unpolished, imperfect, but alive. For the first time in memory, the elements did not roar or clash. They listened. Above, the storm moved on, not in retreat, but in rhythm, and from the broken soil of war, roots reached skyward.